Okay, June, so thanks very much for giving us this interview. As you know, this is about St. John's Park and the community in the area, the parish. And I know from what you told me that your coming to here coincided with that same period.
Right.
What was 1957? Was it?
Came here in 57, yes.
Yeah.
As a very young child.
So what's your memories then of that period when you first came here?
Well, like I was a boarder and we had a very enclosed kind of life, other than when we'd go out to a music club concert down in what we now call the large room. It had a stage and everything in those times. Or I remember going to a new McMaster in Theatre Royal at some stage. And, we had classes. I must say I was very happy in the boarding school. We were very involved in games. I would have been involved in hockey and tennis myself.
Where are you from originally?
I'm from Callan, County Kilkenny.
All right. And your family, who decided that you would come as a boarder? Was it you or your family?
My family, I suppose, grew up. This is now free education, and therefore the secondary school, I don't know if there was a secondary school, there was probably a secondary top in Callan. So I was sent away to boarding school. Again, because I'm the youngest of a very big family. All my brothers were gone away. The youngest was away in boarding school, and most of the others were in college or qualified at that stage, And
so, were you farmers? Or?
My father was a vet, and we also had a farm. Yeah.
Okay. And so, when you came here, you said you were quite happy because there were a lot of sports.
A lot of sports and great friends, and I'm still friendly with a number of my classmates. We meet, some of us meet every 2 years, but we've met every 5 years for the last 30 years for a lunch together or go away overnight. So, you really retain the friendships you make in boarding school because you're very close.
And where were they from, the other people like your friends?
Dublin, Ross, Cork, Listowel, Limerick, Tullamore. They would have been.
That's a good.
Good spread throughout the country.
Range,
yeah.
And was that family traditions that people sent their daughters here?
There would have been, yes, a lot. My mother was a past pupil. My mother came here in 1816, in fact. In 1916. So she actually came for the centenary celebrations in September 1916. She thought it was a wonderful place because there was so much activity going on for these celebrations. So like that, it would have gone down in families,
And I know you are preparing now for the next...
Yes, we're celebrating the bicentenary this September 2016.
When you think of your own mom and how you're doing this.
Yeah.
So I know you're very busy working on it. You're talking about all those things happening in October.
Yes, we're having the celebration day on the 7th of October, the Feast of the Holy Rosary. Bishop will celebrate a big mass in Sacred Heart Church, and there'll be open invitation to all past pupils and some of the past pupils from Dublin and various dignitaries from the city and people who have supported us, but particularly our staffs, and the pupils will be involved in the liturgy. So we have 2 committees working at the moment. One is the overall organising committee for the bicentenary celebrations, which involves the liturgy, the luncheon, the exhibitions that will be on show that day. And then we have a history committee who are writing a book which is a summary of the contents of the annals, the 200 years history of the Ursulines in Waterford.
Okay.
And we're fortunate we have wonderful annals.
And where were the Ursulines from originally? Where were they, the order?
The Ursulines, we were founded in Italy by St. Angela Merici up near Lake Garda. We were founded in Brescia, the city, but she lived out in Desenzano on the shores of Lake Garda. In 1535 the order was founded, and it would have been 5 years before the Jesuits, so it would be just at the peak of Renaissance time. And then the later part of the 16th century we would have spread into France, and that was where we became specifically involved in education. Angela originally didn't found an order of nuns living in a convent. She believed that she had a group of women who lived in their own homes, came together for prayer and went out and did charitable works. and particularly she looked after the women who were suffering from venereal diseases and various things like that in Brescia, because there was a very corrupt time, and women, as you know, were abused by society right through the ages in many ways. And so she was looking after, if you like, the AIDS patients of those days. And then when we went into France, there was a very powerful woman, Mère François de Bermont, down in the Carpentras area, down near the Châteauneuf-du-Pape wine area, that would be the region. And she became very interested in education and had friendly with the Jesuits in Paris, who established their rule at that stage, and our règlement was defined in conjunction with that, and the whole philosophy of education as we developed over the years. And then in moving on, like, how do we get here? Yeah. So in the mid 1700s, there were a couple of attempts by a bishop in Cork, Francis Moylan, to bring Ursulines to Ireland. He had a sister in Paris, and I think that was how the connection. And someone came from Cong in the 1860s, that didn't work out. And then linked with Nan O'Nagle, who was the foundress of the Presentations. She wanted to found sisters, and she sent some of her colleagues over to Paris to be trained as novices by the Ursulines. So then 4 of the Ursulines came back and established the convent in South Douglas Street in Cork, and Nano founded the Presentations at the same time. And then, so Cork was 1771, moved to Thurles 1787, Waterford 1816, and then after various wanderings through Limerick and Ennis and Athlone and Galway, the Sligo group ended up there in 1850.
And I suppose I'm kind of curious about, given the early origins, which were obviously for women who were in really difficult situation, yes. The Ursulines would be probably more associated with probably a bit more kind of upper class than here in Waterford, for example. I mean, it was a boarding school.
Yeah, except that in all cases, I mean, when we came to Waterford here in 1816, we established a school, and you brought in boarders fairly soon, because they were going to be the nucleus of your future sisters if you wanted a continuity. Okay. So that was kind of the focus. But they always established what they referred to then, I don't like the term, a poor school. And there was a lot, I was writing yesterday about, there was a lovely story of when we had a small school here in this site, when having moved over to the old Tremore Road as it was then, they hadn't enough space in the building, and some of the kids had been told to stay at home, and the bishop was out for a walk and he found these kids who were told, he said, "Why aren't you in school?" And he said, "Well, the nuns have no room for us yet, but they're hoping to get money." And he came in and gave a donation, and we had a small little school called Nazareth School, and then we built St. John's, which was the core. It's the gable end building of St. Ursula School today. So that was in 1862, I think.
But would the recruitment for nuns mainly then come from boarding school?
It came from the board. There would have been pupils in the day school as well. I mean, there were some marvellous, I think of a marvellous woman, Mary Curtis. She was from, I think it was Lombard Street or somewhere along there. And I think she had been adopted by the parents, or they fostered her or something. I know there was a problem when she went to take vows, because she wasn't, her status was deemed to be slightly different. But she was a brilliant woman, and she wrote the first book of architecture written by any woman in the British Isles, is the term. And interestingly, only last year I got an email from a professor in the University of Pittsburgh, asking me, saying he had this little volume of history of architecture written by a member of the community of Ursuline St. Mary's Waterford. Would I know anything about her? Could I identify her? And I found her whole history, and she was a brilliant woman. And there was another interesting thing. You would think nuns in those days would be backward. There was some woman, Sheil was her name. She was a sister of Richard Lawler Sheil, who was a contemporary of Daniel O'Connell's in the fight for emancipation at that time. And she wanted to enter, but her health wasn't good enough. and she was asked to, she asked the nuns, could she have a room in the boarding school? She just wanted to come and she'd help in any way she could. Now she was well read in D'Alembert, Decai, a lot of French writers, Manzoni, the Italian writer, right across Goethe, German writings. She could speak these languages, and the nuns were smart enough to see this woman could be a great help to the education of the young nuns. And she was used, so she broadened their whole vistas. She educated them in the history of art, architecture and so on. So this little Mary Curtis from Lombard Street, who became Sister Mary Augustine, she became a brilliant writer. She wrote a history of England, interestingly at the time too. It was a subsequent book, and she only died in 1845, and she was only 43 years of age. So she had accomplished a great deal in her life.
Mm. And then when you were a boarder here, how did it work then as regards going from becoming a boarder to becoming interested in the actual becoming a nun and all that?
I suppose life was very different then, and it wouldn't happen now. I went straight from school. I went home for the summer holidays and I came back here on the 4th of September 1963 and entered.
And what did your parents say when you said to them?
They were disappointed at one level, but they certainly didn't resist in any way, and they were very happy in the end, you know. But I know my father tried to persuade me to go to university first before I entered, and I was, you know, during maybe 4th and 5th year in school, I began to see I just admired the way of life of the nuns, and I was attracted to the life of prayer, really. I think that was the key thing. It wasn't to be a teacher or anything, it was looking at the nuns at prayer. I thought this is a worthwhile life, and that's what attracted me. So I entered straight, and then after 3 years I went to university and did my training.
And did you train in Waterford?
No, I went to UCC.
Okay.
I did a degree in UCC.
No, but I'm saying is you were the whole team of becoming a nun?
Oh, and yes, I did my novitiate here.
Okay.
Mother Teresa was mistress of novices, and it was like novices were flourishing at that time. There were about 12 or 14 of us in the noviceship together in those days. And there's still quite a group of us here today who are of that original group. Sister Elizabeth, whom a lot of the people in Belgium would have had in the primary school, Sister Breda, Sister Columba, she then was, Sister Barbara, they were all in the noviceship. They're here with me still, you know.
And then when did you start teaching here then?
I came back from university in 1970, and I became a teacher in the school. Then 1975, Sister Concilio was the principal before me, and she went away to do a master's, and Trim Maynooth and I was put in as headmistress for a temporary position, and then, like a lot of things, she was sent to our house in Dublin and never came back. So I was stuck with the job for 30 years.
And you were saying too that you know, when the parish, when they first started off, there was no church here, and they used to use the...
Yes, we had a domestic economy college up opposite the dog track. It was founded in 1904, which was a kind of a very far-seeing thing to do at that time. And behind the old two-storey building that was there, when they developed the domestic economy college, they built a big corrugated roof building, used to be the size nearly of the floor space of a sports hall, and the classrooms and the kitchens and the everything, all the teaching was done in that. And then that was closed in 1952, and St. Signhill College and various domestic economy colleges opened around the country, so the need for it was no longer there. And the parish, St. John's Parish, was huge because, you know, St. John's Park had developed lots of areas out the Dunmore Road, and there was inadequate service for church space, like. And Father Bobby Keane was a very, what shall I call it, entrepreneur and go-getter. He undertook the project to build the two churches, the Joseph Manillas and the Sacred Heart Church at the time. But during that interim period, our building, the single-storey corrugated building, became the Chapel of Ease. Okay. I remember going up there and playing in benediction on Sunday afternoons on a dreadful old harmonium, and you're pumped and pumped to try and get the notes out in it.
And did that become kind of like an unofficial kind of community centre as well at that time?
It did, yes. It was used. I remember subsequent to that, there used to be discos up there, and pioneer hops, and as a sister on duty in the boarding school, we'd be bringing them up to the hops and waiting for the time to end and bring the kids home.
And I mean, the relationship with the local community, what have you seen over those years as regards from the nuns, from the convent point of view? What changes?
I think you would always have had great links between the sisters and the families in the parish. Like if you go back to free education, pre-1967, when you had St Ursula's secondary top, and secondary education was provided there for girls whose parents couldn't afford to send them to a fee-paying school. And St Anne's building, which is the building below the old convent, that was a fee-paying day school. And right down the years there would have been quite a number of pupils. St Anne's, I think, was opened originally in 1844. So the education there, so that the parents of all the kids would have had a close liaison with the nuns whom they worked with, or who taught them.
So in essentially 3 different schools here?
There were 3 different, and then in 1967 St Angela's School was established.
That was when...
that was after Donna O'Malley brought in the free education scheme.
Okay.
So we just had 1 secondary school.
And, that was a big change there.
Oh, it was. It was a huge change. And
how did the nuns, how did they cope with that? What was it?
I think, like our sisters all over the years, in good times and bad, they just adjust to the needs of the time and the needs of the people, because that's what comes first. And I don't remember it. Now, I was actually in university for those few years when the Change Act, but I remember helping out at the beginning of the school year, because I didn't go back to college till October. And there were no big hitches about it, or there was no big deal about it.
But was it seen as kind of controversial, or was
No, because I think the vast majority of schools changed over at that time. Even though the department didn't provide huge funding for the education of kids. I think that the first thing they gave £25 per head for the student for the year.
And then how has it worked as regards, because you had the tradition here of the boarding school and the fee-paying school, I mean, you probably would have attracted a certain class of girl. And then when you have the girls coming in from the local estate, from the council estate, I mean, that's a difficult thing to manage, isn't it, to get it right, because you don't want to lose either side.
Well, I think our whole goal was about integration and inclusivity, to use the contemporary term, that according to Angela's theory, it's the uniqueness of the individual and respect for the uniqueness of each person. That they were 2 key things, respect and uniqueness, in Angela's philosophy. And that was applied so that it didn't matter who you were. And I think the fact that we changed immediately to 1 uniform. St Ursula's had a blue and white, people from the parish will remember the blue and white striped blouse and so on. St Anne's had a wine pinafore and a blue blouse, and the boarders had a red and white. And by common agreement from all the schools, they said they wanted to take the red jumper and the grey skirt, and that's what was adopted. And once pupils are all in the same uniform, that's why I think uniform is a great leveller in schools. In some schools they say you shouldn't have uniform, and I know Rory Quinn was one of the people who kind of was suggesting we shouldn't have uniforms. But I think when kids are dressed the same, it doesn't matter whether you're from Ballymun or Foxrock. And I suppose our philosophy, Angela's philosophy, always was about the respect for the individual, the uniqueness of the person. And that's how, as Ursuline educators, we always try to see pupils. And there shouldn't be. I mean, I know we're human, and people will say, oh, sister so-and-so had favourites or whatever, but I suppose we're human too.
And you kept the boarding school went on for how many, until when?
Until 1983.
Okay.
And again, the boarding school, I think about 1978, 79, made a decision to phase out the boarding school, because there's still a demand, interestingly, but it became more difficult to run a boarding school in the way we liked to run it. the weekend pattern was there, and there was a particular type of educational experience during weekends in the extracurricular programme. And then you had kids who were near, I'm going home this weekend, and parents are ringing, and we need her home this weekend. And then you had, the others became disgruntled because their pals were gone home, and it became more difficult to run it really. And there was a huge demand for the places in the day school. And you see, by definition, the borders occupied 100 places automatically. The school would have been probably about 600, secondary school would have been about 600 at that stage.
There's probably not many boarding schools left, is there?
Ursula in Thurles. We have a boarding school in Thurles, which again is completely oversubscribed. And the presentations in Thurles have a lay-run boarding school. And I can't name another one. Maybe there are some up in the west of Ireland, but I'm not aware of any others.
And then, is there anything else that you remember from your time here as regards to changes in the area, St. John's Park?
I remember the Corpus Christi procession going right up through St. John's Park, and all the houses, they had them beautifully decorated, and the priest, whether it was Father Michael Russell or Father Nugent, Father Nugent probably was still in his time, and the procession went up, and you had all the old stalwarts of the parish of that time, John Colbert and Terry Leahy's father. He was the original sacristan in the church, Liam Curran, and they would carry the banner, or I can't remember the word for the covering that was carried over the Blessed Sacrament, processed right up through the park, and they up at the top of the square then. There was benediction when you got up there, and the singing of hymns, and it was a great day. The people of St. John's Park took such pride in that. It really was an important event.
And that was the first of May, was it?
No, Corpus Christi.
Oh, Corpus Christi.
Generally, Corpus Christi is the Thursday week after Pentecost, is it? And it's a feast that's now moved to the following Sunday.
And any other, kind of rituals or things like that which now are no longer there, did you remember?
I think we used to have a school walk, a fundraiser in school. I remember back in my early days, on a Sunday in the third term, we always had a walk, and we started from down in the green in Ballytruckle, and we walked out by Ballinamona and across. There was no ring road then, and across at Castletown School, and the whole way over to the Dunmore Road and back in. And it was terrific spirited, and again the parish were very involved in it. And there was great camaraderie and people supporting one another.
And just was your own observations about, we say, the role of women in how, because initially, I suppose when you started, you were probably at that time where women would have to give up work when they got married and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Have you? I know you were talking earlier on about the order and their, I suppose, it being a place for women.
Yeah, I always say that St. Angela was one of the first feminists, and I'm not strongly into feminism myself, because I think it's this whole thing of equality is a wrong word. It's about complementarity. I believe very strongly. I grew up in a house with 7 brothers, and I was the only girl, and I had no problem about my femininity and my role and my place. And I see it even the same when you see the religious women of the 19th century and all the educators of the Mercies and Presentations, and women who did stalwart things through the 19th century. They weren't cowed women. They didn't need to fight for their... So I come from a perspective where I see women being very forthright in their role in society and what they could offer to society, and they weren't limited. Now, I was never limited by the marriage ban because I didn't get married, so maybe the way of life enabled that in some way. But I believe strongly that women have gifts that men don't have, and men have gifts that women don't have. So therefore, I think it's complementarity is about the word,
And how would you, obviously there's this kind of sadness though from your perspective, in the sense of the role of the church in Ireland now at this particular point.
Yeah, I think the church has suffered in 2 things. One, naturally the abuse scandals have hit them terribly. But I think sadly the media has not helped to keep a sense of perspective about that. When you think of 3% of abuse was done by priests or brothers or whatever, you know, what about the other 97% of abuse? And even in school, I have dealt with cases where there was abuse in families and I got no cooperation when I tried to deal with it. Mum's the word, don't disturb our family, leave us alone. So to that extent, you know, if one came as an outsider to Ireland, you think all the abuse is rampant among all the priests, all the clergy. And, you know, that's a completely false perspective. But it's contemporaneous with the whole move towards secularism and the whole secularisation of our society. And I think Ireland, we always seem to develop a pattern of taking the most extreme form or practice of whatever the contemporary philosophy is. I mean, you'll find the church in England even, or the church in France, and France is, as you know, a very secular society, but the church has a role and is respected. You know, a lot of contemporary political leaders have not helped the position of the church. You know, so much happened in the last 10 years, and I could list umpteen things done by politicians that really undermined church and kind of just dismissed.
But we say in relation to, we say the contemplative orders, there's probably women, there's probably a lot more women interested in those than, we say, more the teaching orders. Would that be true?
Well, there's always the people interested in contemplative, like the Carmelites or the Cistercians and so on. That would always been a much smaller number, you know, and their communities were always small at a time when our community was 45, 50 when I entered, you know, whereas the Carmelites down in Tallow would have been had about 13. I think 13 was the optimum number deemed in that, because it's a very specialised, a very specific call. There are people, you know, today now there are some entering contemplative orders, but they're suffering as well. Okay. But interestingly, if you go to the southern states in the United States, or go to other parts of Africa, South America, or the Eastern Church, you'll find that religious life is thriving much better. Take Eastern Europe. I mean, the Ursulines in Poland, there are a huge number of them. We've 850 Ursulines in India. You know, so in different parts of the world, the Ursuline vocation is still very strong, and we're only one example among myriads.
Because people still are interested in spiritualism. You know, some sort of spiritual life.
Spiritual life.
Some sort of, so, I mean, I suppose it probably is a criticism of the church in some ways that they're not adapting to what people want in some way, you know, shape or form. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think, again, the church can be blamed. I mean, your spiritual life is not just about me. It has a social dimension. I'm part of a church and liturgy. I mean, Christ is the greatest gift. The fact that Christ came on earth and the institution of the Eucharist, Christ is present to us in the Blessed Eucharist. And if you don't have liturgy, if you don't have the Mass to reproduce the bread and wine and change it into the body and blood of Christ, you don't have Christ present. And for me, in my religious life, having the Blessed Sacrament inside the oratory is a central part of my day. I'll spend time in there in contemplation, or attempting to spend time in contemplation, for good or for ill, with my attempts at times. But, you know, I think that dimension is lost. Like, I can't just be, I'm a spiritual person and it's me and myself, and it isn't being part of unity. I'm called to worship in a community, and that's part of the call of Christ, and that through that call as a community we bring out the message of the gospel to others in the way we treat them, the love we bring to them, and whatever, you know. So it's a bigger thing than just saying I'm a spiritual person. And I think words can be bandied around. I know you use the word spiritualism. I would disagree with that. That's a totally different meaning as such. So it's really about a relationship. If you ask me, what's the central thing? My relationship with Christ. My call to a life of prayer, and that's lived out through liturgy and personal prayer.
Well, I mean, would you see, what would you see as the future for the order here in Waterford?
I don't know. That's a very difficult one. I mean, we may or may not. There is a big structure of Roman Union of Ursulines, which is very worldwide, and we may or may not join with those. And they, you know, they would be relating with a lot of these groups of Ursulines where the Ursulines are thriving. You know, so that I think you have to take a long-term perspective. I think religious life in Ireland will change radically. You may have people coming together as groups committed to serving others, coming together for prayer, and they may not call themselves religious in terms of committed. They may not undertake vows. They may not take on the vows of poverty, chastity and obedience. That may be the case. But at the same, Christ has promised he'll be with the church always. And St. Angela Fennelly said exactly the same thing. I will be with you till the end of time. So there will be some form. And there are great young people out there today but the society out there doesn't support them in any attempt that they may have to kind of express their spiritual lives.
And would you think that the church could change somewhat, I mean, from a structural point of view?
I think
involve women more in this.
Yes, I think that may so. I mean, I know the old thing of women priests and the role of women in the church is a big issue, and I personally wouldn't have any aspiration to saying I want to be a priest, but I think it'll evolve in time. I think possibly the married priesthood may come before female priests, and I'm not a theologian enough to understand the continuity of the gift of ordination. I mean, I think that's a crucial thing, that Christ ordained a group of men. I know you can say, well, if it could have been different, it could have been women, but he was friendly with women as well. He didn't ordain either Martha or Mary. And the church needs to be very sure that they are, if they ordain the next person, that it is valid. Because it's the one thing we can claim in the Catholic Church, that the continuity of ordination has been validly protected. And that's where the Anglican Church has lost out a bit, because after Luther they changed and they lost that continuity of ordination. They've gone back now to using the term priest, as you know, but it is a different connotation from ours.
Okay, June, thanks a million for doing the talk with us and chat with us, and best of luck with the 200
Thank you very much.